Braun-Duin, Bant Eldrazi Mir. It is the last round of Modern here on day 2 of the Invitational. And for these two players, nearly identical deck lists. They have 59 cards in similar in the main deck. Braun-Duin wins the die roll and starts off on Brushland into Noble Hierarch.
All right, this is a great start. It's kind of like an Eldrazi Temple.
You have to spend 2 cards on it, but that's still probably good enough.
Right. The nice thing is in this matchup, the removal spell's Path to Exile, so the Noble's never going to go down on mana when they kill it, except in the case of Dismember. Though it's not the most inviting Dismember target.
Yeah, turn 2, Matter Reshaper from Braun-Duin. Rubin will ramp on his own with Eldrazi Temple. He plays Eldrazi Displacer. So go back to Braun-Duin. Swings with Matter Reshaper, offers a trade, but Rubin isn't having any of it. He goes down to 17.
Displacer among the most important cards in this matchup. If you can set up the Eldrazi Displacer Drowner of Hope lock, you should be able to pull away with the game.
Thought-Knot Seer from Braun-Duin. We'll take a look at Rubin's hand. This was a turn 3 play. We see Reality Smasher, Spellskite. Looks like 3 lands.
And I believe that's Path to Exile, one of the non-conflux arts.
So there's some interesting interactions here between Thought-Knot Seer and Eldrazi Displacer. Brian takes the Path to Exile.
Yeah, so Displacer can make it leave and re-enter the battlefield, causes both triggers, of course. With Brian controlling both triggers, you can draw the card first and then get another look at your hand. You'd rather be displacing your own Thought-Knot Seer.
Rubin plays a tap land and a Spellskite. We go back to Braun-Duin. Rubin picked up a Drowner of Hope that turn, so for the next 2 turns, he has 2 great plays set up in Reality Smasher and Drowner.
Yeah, and he has Spellskite hanging out to eat up any Path to Exiles that Brian would have to just wreck that combo.
Well, Brian can't wreck the combo, but maybe he can just wreck Steve's life total. Reality Smasher joins the fray, and a big swing of 9 damage puts Steve Rubin down to 7.
And he needs a Temple if he wants to cast Drowner this turn.
Yeah, Drowner plus Displacer is kind of the ultimate late game here in the mirror.
Yeah, you can just keep blinking it. He'd be able to have 2 activations in the same turn. That makes 4 Scions, and you can use the Scions to tap the opposing creatures. Notably, Reality Smasher's text that interacts with removal spells, where they have to discard a card if it's targeted by a spell, does not trigger with abilities, so you can just Drowner it out.
Thought-Knot Seer from Steve Rubin takes an Eldrazi Displacer out of Braun-Duin's hand, leaving him with just a land. Rubin will pass, but now he has to survive until his next turn.
Yeah, and the Thought-Knot Seer will do a good job of blocking here. So you can put Thought-Knot on Thought-Knot, Spellskite on a Reshaper, and survive, only taking 5 down to 2.
So then he can survive with Displacer, Skite, and Drowner.
Right, though if Brian picks up a Path to Exile or even a Dismember here, even a redirect here would allow him to have a lethal attack.
Rubin swings in with Displacer, decides he's not going to block. Braun-Duin draws. He'll also get a draw off of Thought-Knot when it trades.
Right. Given that the attack is not lethal, there's a good chance that Braun-Duin just attacks with Reality Smasher here as a 6/6.
Do you think Braun-Duin doesn't want the Thought-Knots to trade, or he does want them to trade?
So Rubin's hand is made. He already knows he has the land and the Drowner. Braun-Duin would like to draw a card here, so there is an argument for forcing that trade.
You were saying something like a Path to Exile would be really welcome from Brian's side.
Right, though drawing it after the trade happens, the Spellskite would still be on the table, so he wouldn't be able to break up the combo.
Brian has made up his mind. He's going to swing all 3 Eldrazi. He will offer the trade to Rubin. You said this might actually be forced, that Rubin will have to trade Thought-Knots.
Yeah, the other options are looking quite bad. He could get the Spellskite eaten by Braun-Duin's Thought-Knot and eat the Matter Reshaper for Braun-Duin, but he's just kind of going down 2 cards in that exchange and still taking the exact same amount of damage.
Rubin is at 7. Reality Smasher has Trample. He'll likely drop down to 2 this combat unless he chump blocks Reality Smasher.
Given that Brian makes this attack, Rubin knows that he does not have Path to Exile or Dismember, so the Spellskite loses a little bit of value, though I imagine that the block with the trade is just going to be better.
All right, Thought-Knot Seer's trade. Both players draw. Rubin goes down to 2 off Reality Smasher. A big draw for Brian. He would love to hit something here.
Looks like a brush land.
That's not going to work. I guess his best draw would be a Drowner of Hope. Noble Hierarch, Hollowed Fountain, and a pass. So the door is open for Steve Rubin to stabilize. He has Drowner of Hope, he has Path to Exile in hand. Keep in mind, Rubin is at 2. Now we got basic land check here. Yeah, he'll swing with Displacer. He's got 1 Plains in play. It looks like he does have a basic forest in his deck, so he's going to go to 1 on this fetch.
And 1 will be enough, barring Braun-Duin picking up a Reality Smasher on this next turn. He'll be able to use these tokens from the Drowner, tap down the Smasher and the Matter Reshaper. Issue with letting the Matter Reshaper attack is double exalted from Noble Hierarch, which would force a block. But he can tap down both of those creatures and he'll be able to untap with double Displacer activations off of just the Eldrazi Temple.
Now, here's something though. If Brian has a kill spell, Rubin can't use the Spellskite anymore.
It's true. He would have to pay mana for it. He's at 1 life.
So, and I like this one from Steve Rubin. Brian goes to attacks. Rubin taps only the Reality Smasher. So now if Brian attacks, Rubin can block with the Scion and tap something else.
Right. Only Noble Hierarchs to tap down, but he's got to start attacking at some point here. Presumably on the following turn, he'll be more than happy to send in the Drowner. It will end up getting tapped when he activates the Displacer anyway.
Matter Shaper double exalts. The Scion blocks and taps a Hierarch. Rubin stays at 1 life. Now for Braun-Duin, it is another Thought-Knot Seer. Reality Smasher, Eldrazi Displacer, Path to Exile. A very strong hand from Steve Rubin.
Yeah, these are really good leftovers here, with a board position that's already commanding. Even though Braun-Duin has more material, that combo is really what matters here.
There is some mana awkwardness for Steve Rubin. If he wants to use Displacer twice in a turn, he has to do it all in one go.
Yeah, because he only has Eldrazi Temple as his colorless source. He would want to peel a second copy of that or some kind of pain land. Also noteworthy that those Noble Hierarchs are lethal attackers here for Braun-Duin if they were able to punch through.
Yeah, right, there's 1/2s they would exalt, or as 2/3s even, they'll exalt enough. Now, Steve should have that covered with Spellskite.
Right, Spellskite will be able to jump in front of that for the foreseeable future.
For the second time, Brian chooses to exile Steve's removal spell, but he plays his last card. Braun-Duin did not get the kill spell he needed to force that last point.
And with Steve having double Displacer activation on the table, Path to Exile is the most likely spell that Steve would be casting this game. Any additional land that he doesn't have to pay life for would make him able to cast that in addition to the double activation.
Rubin's draw for the turn was Windswept Heath. He's not going to be able to use that land this game. There's no actually sources of life gain in the main deck.
Yep, that's a dead draw there.
Steve now counting. He can swing Drowner and blink it twice. That's I think the level 1 play, but he's looking for more here.
Checking out options. He's going to be shy of getting to lethal by casting Reality Smasher on this turn. Braun-Duin just has too much stuff, too much life. So I like attacking and then getting for the double blink.
Braun-Duin down to 8 on the attack. And now we see what does Rubin want to do. Eldrazi Temple will make 2 colorless. So he casts, okay, he's floating mana, so he casts an Eldrazi Displacer and displaces the Drowner once.
And seeing as the Reality Smasher is the only creature with trample for Braun-Duin, he only has to tap one thing as the board exists with the Drowner. So he doesn't need 2 activations this turn, and the extra Displacer going forward could potentially protect the other Displacer from a removal spell. Also, it's just another attacker on the table.
All right, Braun-Duin draws a card, goes to attacks. The Reality Smasher is tapped. And you mentioned Rubin could be looking to win as soon as next turn. Right, he can tap down most of Brian's team, then displace the rest of it and just attack.
He has 1 Scion, which if Braun-Duin makes an attack here, the Scion could tap something else and he could just displace the other 2 things and it would be lethal. So Brian just can't attack here.
Right, so he just has to pass the turn. Steve gets to keep one of his 2 Scions around as he goes and untaps. Remember, both players know about a Reality Smasher still in hand. For Steve, picks up a good one here. It's Brushland. That's his 7th mana source. It's a second land that can make colorless, and it also now means he can set aside that breeding pool for Spellskite.
Yep. Much better than the Windswept Teeth. And now, I imagine we'll see Rubin play this conservatively. He has the luxury of doing so. He can wait until Braun-Duin's turn, double activate the Drowner, tap down the team, and swing for lethal on the following turn. Attack on this turn will be quite aggressive.
So maybe just let something like land go?
Yeah.
He's looking at some more aggressive options here. You see reaching for the Scion.
Given that he's able to activate Displacer on Drowner twice and has the blue mana floating for Spellskite, I really like just passing the turn.
He's going to tap Matter Reshaper and swing with the 5/5. Braun-Duin has to chump block away with a Noble Hierarch, and now we see the Brushland and a pass. I suppose if Steve was already planning to displace this Drowner, that attack's pretty free.
Sure, it doesn't really cost him anything, but eating the Noble Hierarch isn't a significant gain.
He's going to displace the Drowner twice, getting 4 Scions. He's still setting up for a lethal attack next turn. Brian goes to attacks. Reality Smasher is tapped. Yeah, with as many Scions as Brian has creatures, it doesn't take too much work to see how this next attack is going to be lethal.
Right.
Steve untaps. Draws Noble Hierarch, but he's got everything he needs in play, along with the Reality Smasher in hand. At 1 life, it looks like Steve Rubin is going to take the first of these games.
And with Braun-Duin at 8, it just takes Drowner plus Displacer as attackers to make this lethal.
Yeah, here's Smasher. It's going to tap out Brian's team, and here comes everyone. And game 1, the comeback win here from Steve Rubin. Spellskite manages to protect the combo of Eldrazi Displacer and Drowner of Hope, and we're on to the second game.
And with the Reality Smasher, he had 2 pair of lethal attackers there, 2, 5, and 3 combinations.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and look first at the sideboards. Let's start over on Steve Rubin's side because these players actually have reasonably different sideboards. We see Grafdigger's Cage, Rest in Peace. Not really surprised to see that level of commitment this weekend
No,
to the
not
graveyard.
at all.
Negate, Stubborn Denial, Blessed Alliance. This is actually a card from Eldritch Moon. A World Breaker, 3 Stony Silence, a Worship, and 2 Engineered Explosives.
Big finds here, the World Breaker. It's a little larger than everything else in the deck. And Worship is actually kind of technology that was initially developed for this mirror match. These decks are never going to be able to kill all the opposing creatures and never going to be able to deal with the Worship, so you can pull ahead with that. And I also like Blessed Alliance. You'll end up in a lot of situations that involve attacks just with Noble Hierarch Exalted triggers as your only way to punch through. The Blessed Alliance will be able to allow you to just make them sacrifice their lone attacking creature. You can even gain some life on top of that.
Brian's sideboard is similar, but it's fewer cards. He's made a bigger commitment to the cards he's actually playing. Stubborn Denial, Grafdigger's Cage, Engineer Explosive, Stony Silence, Blessed Alliance, and Worship. Now, a lot of these are hate cards for combo decks, which Steve isn't.
You're right. He also has Blessed Alliance. He also has Worship. He's missing on Worldbreaker. In Worldbreaker, if you're able to get that going and cast it once or twice, destroy their temples, you can really close the game in the mirror.
So does this mean that if Steve Rubin, because he has Worldbreaker and Brian does not, if Steve Rubin draws his one of Worship, Brian might just be colded by it?
Yeah, the Worldbreaker blows up Worship. Brian can't do that.
I've seen, what is it? I've seen Eldrazi players win through a Worship using Thought Not Seer Eldrazi Displacer to mill their opponent. It's really rough.
I'm really hoping that's not the game that we watch here.
It's a thing that happens. It's real gross.
It's a much better anecdote than viewing experience.
Yeah. No joke. Players are going to get ready for a second game over here. We're going to tell you about the sale we have running right now at StarCityGames.com. All summer long, we have been doing weekly sales, so we have a different thing on sale from the Star City Games store every single week. This week, you can save 10% on all non-English singles. So you see over here, getting maybe your Cube or your Commander deck, you can go ahead and get that in the language you prefer. Those are going to be on sale up until 10:59 a.m. Eastern Time on Monday, and when we will start our next weekly sale. So make sure to head over to the store at StarCityGames.com to get this before the week's end.
Really like that Russian Simian Spirit Guide on there. Russian is always a really fun language to play with because a lot of your opponents will think it's English upside down, and then they pick it up to read it and just have no idea what's going on.
Braun-Duin at 9-2, he's playing for he qualified for his first time for the World Championships this year as the Grand Prix Master. Of course, he has been a mainstay here on the SCG Tour. From Roanoke, Virginia, 14 top 8s along with a win. He has 4 invitational top 8s to his name. I think he's had the most deep runs consistently of any player in SCG Invitationals. Has been the lone undefeated player on multiple occasions.
Yeah.
Remember, he made it into the top 4 at the 2014 Players' Championship as well. He's on the play here for game number 2. And last game, the early aggression was all Brian. He had the turn 3 Thought Not Seer into the turn 4 Reality Smasher, but it turned out to not be enough as Steve Rubin was able to turn the tides. Rubin starts out on Noble Hierarch, Brian quick to dismember.
When your Eldrazi opponent has 2 lands that are not Eldrazi Temple and is not cast Noble Hierarch, it's a fair assumption that the 3rd land is going to be Eldrazi Temple and the play is going to be Thought Not Seer.
So Steve drawing an Eldrazi Temple for the turn. He could have had one of those swing for the fences starts. You see Steve's hand, it looks to be a Thought Not Seer and multiple Reality Smashers as well as another Eldrazi Temple.
Yeah, the dismember for Brian there was very important.
Yeah. I'm saying if Steve had one turn earlier drawn that temple, one of the scariest things you can see out of this deck is when they start the game on Eldrazi Temple and say go.
Yes. Usually is a turn 2 Thought Not Seer.
And for Brian, all his lands are just making 1 mana. Plays Cavern of Souls. And he'll start with the Matter Shaper.
Yeah, so it looks like Brian was very heavily weighing that dismember in the opener to break up a Noble Hierarch draw specifically.
Both players have set their Cavern of Souls to human.
When you're casting Eldrazi, you're usually making colorless mana for it anyway. You don't expect your Bant Eldrazi opponent to counter your Eldrazi.
And now Rubin, the choice between Smasher and Thought Not. He's just going to go straight for the Reality Smasher. 5 damage comes crashing in, and Brian is down to 10. You see those 2 shock lands, or rather, sorry, in this graveyard you see the Dismember and the Windswept Heath. There's 5 damage. Brian has done 5 more of his own.
And the other advantage on the land front here, Steve has 2 lands that tap for 2 mana. Brian still at 0, making his 4th land drop.
You did say in the mirror that drawing Eldrazi Temple was going to be the best thing you could do, and I see Steve up 2-0 on this board.
Yeah.
Thought Not Seer from Braun-Duin, but he's not going to like what he sees. He sees a Thought Not from Rubin, a second Smasher, and a Drowner to go with lands number 4 and 5.
The Drowner and the Smasher are both backbreaking.
He almost has to take the Drowner, right?
Yeah, the Drowner is the more likely card to be completely unbeatable. The Smasher is going to be tough. At least on the next turn, If Steve just attacks with 2 smashers, you can put both your creatures in front of 1. You only lose the Thought-Knot Seer.
You go to 4.
You can try to set up the same combat against the other one.
Yeah, the good news is that you can drop to 4 and let your opponent draw a card next turn. And you hope Steve doesn't drop Path to Exile here.
Don't give me the bad news.
Oh, and then I'm not sure. I think Steve did just draw Path to Exile. Oh no, this is a disaster. Here's a Reality Smasher, and Brian. Really? Yeah, you have to match his phrase. Really?
Yeah,
you see that?
Yeah.
Look at the head shake there. He's like,
I saw your hand.
He's like, you kidding me? You drew a Path to Exile? Well, that is pretty good right here.
A lot of people ask me about not playing Thoughtseize in my Grixis decks, and part of it is
this?
this always happens to me. This has never not happened to me.
I believe the term for this that I've heard, which I love, is this is called getting Thoughtseize tilted. is when you tilt yourself by Thoughtseizing your opponent, then realizing just how lucky everyone is against you.
Yeah.
And Steve, yeah, here we go. Path to Exile on the Matter Reshaper, no card for Brian. A card for Steve, he's going to kill the Thought-Knot Seer, he's going to trample over for 6, draw a card, put Brian to 3, you know, hit him across the head, sign the match slip.
And amusingly, the unbeatable card, the 1-of sideboard card, is Worship, but Braun-Duin is out of creatures.
Oh no.
Can't even draw that.
Okay. He could chain Drowner of Hopes from here.
Yeah. He has his 6th 1-mana land and a Drowner.
3 smashers isn't going to do it. Steve Rubin, 2-0, is your winner.
I haven't played the mirror enough to know what hands you're supposed to mulligan. Brian's hand was certainly weaker than Rubin. He was definitely relying on the Dismember to do what it did there and probably hoping to draw a temple of his own, and he just kind of missed on the temple is what we saw.